Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. I'm your host, James Gardner, certified athletic therapist, certified strength and conditioning specialist, yoga instructor, human being. This platform, for the pros, by the pros, anybody in the performance space, and beyond. Welcome here to share in the stories of professionals, experiences, journeys, learning along the way. It's a platform to connect, to network, and to be a part of a community that cares, with conversations that matter, experiences that resonate, and generate ideas, thought-provoking, organic dialogue, passionate pros. Brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics. In association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. It's First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of it.
Welcome to First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy roundtable brought to you by First Star Therapy. I'm your host, James Gardner, and this is a platform for the pros, by the pros. Passionate pros, organic dialogue. Let's chat. Thanks for listening. Let's roll.
Session 72. First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast, brought to you as always by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Epic, and Benchmark Athletics. In association with the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Extremely special guest this evening. Great human being, colleague, a friend, a mentor. Dan Noble's here this evening. I'll get to his bio in a second. But before we get there, just wanted to thank everybody for your time, for being here live, for everybody picking this up on the podcast, wherever you are. Again, it's conversations like these. It's getting insight from people like this, sharing stories, sharing paths, connecting through times when we are a little bit more disconnected. So Dan Noble, our guest this evening, session 72. He's co-owner and director of athlete performance at Grit Athletics in Toronto and was recently named head of hockey at Upper Canada College. He is the director of performance for the Halifax Thunderbirds of the NLL, is a speaker, performance consultant, contributing author. I could go on and on and on. He's been working with high-level athletes for the past 15 years. He is an athletic development coach and specializes in skill acquisition, constraints-based learning, movement, and childhood and youth athletic development. He also works in coaching education and, again, is a speaker and author. He's contributed to the best-selling book, Conscious Coaching, and is a regularly featured sports performance hockey expert, having been in Sports Illustrated, The Hockey News, Hockey Night in Canada, Sportsnet, and other top media outlets. He also regularly trains and consults with Olympians and athletes from all over junior hockey, the NHL, CFL, and the NCAA, just to name a few. Dan, a pleasure to have you, man. Great to see you in two dimensions. And as always, looking clean shaven. And I know you have a lot of special women in your life as well. So Mother's Day, to squeeze this one in on this day. I really appreciate it, man.
Awesome. I just tried to drop it like 15 minutes before the podcast actually started. So she had no time to actually, fight back against the idea of it. So
yeah, well done. Keep them on their toes. That's what we do in the training space. Just no preconceived notions about it. Listen, man, we've got to know each other over the last few months and through a pandemic and through your opening of a facility here in Toronto and my aligning with you through a previous guest, a friend, a colleague in Adam Douglas and a lot of the things that we've gone through this, we can probably dive into in some form or fashion here in terms of, your outlets with athletes outlets with you and what you've learned through this and sharing that, I think, with people who are on the call. It's been hard. It's been great. It's been, I don't know if it's ever been easy, but it might've been easy at one time or another. It's been all those things. But before we get there, just want to take sort of people through your path and how you got to where you're at now. You started out way back when, and you played some football, you went overseas, did some things, but I'll let you share your story and sort of your evolution to where you're at now.
Yeah, I'll try. This is the part of these things where I usually go off the rails, and 40 minutes later you're ready to say goodbye to me. But so I'll try to be concise here. My path is a very inconvenient one, and probably atypical to most people in our field. I've never really kind of fit into any sort of mold or cookie cutter, and even more so now. Like most, I find. Maybe you and I, James, are outliers. I'm not sure in this, but most people in our fields are typically, type A personalities and very just like structured and, followed a path. And, for myself, again, just to kind of give a quick background, when I was a child, I suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, to the point where, I almost lost my life. And that was the reason why I always tell that, because that event, kind of shaped the next 20 years of my life, because when I was 5 at the time of the injury. And when I joined school, I had to get brain scans and EKGs and all this stuff done regularly every year, just because to make sure that I didn't have, wasn't going to have strokes and, things were developing as they should be. And, so just as a child that you're constantly being poked and prodded, up until you're 12 years old is just a weird part of your development, and you almost feel like a test subject at times, and everyone treats you with these like gloves on. It's like, oh, you're that one, so when you're around your parents and all their friends are like, they treat you like you're this, you've got like this bubble wrap around you, and then when you go to school, they're just trying to find a place for you, because I did come out of there, and whether it's the chicken or the egg, scenario, I had, significant learning disabilities and struggled pretty heavily socially as well in school. And so school was, from day one was a war zone for me, and it's just like the most uncomfortable place. I used to remember getting up every single day and just dreading going to school from the day I went, from when I was in kindergarten to, when my teacher would slap my pencil out of my hand because I was writing with my left hand and she wanted me to write with my right hand. And where, teachers would talk to my parents as if I wasn't even in the room and talk about how they're going to start having to look at alternative education, for me, and that, I'm never going to be able to last, and they need to start to plan for my future because of, and this whole time I was like, you feel like you're watching yourself, right? You're just watching these people that, speak about you as if you have no, like literally I have no control over my own life or thoughts. And, and so it was an interesting, going into high school again, really the only outlets I had were sports. That was the only area that I ever excelled in, and, I didn't have a ton of friends and, I had social circles, but no one that really like that I felt cared about me and like had my back, and all those things. I think, there's a research study where they looked at what kids need to succeed in academic settings. And they talked about the importance of knowing they were cared about by their friends, and the importance they were cared about by their teachers, and I didn't feel like I had either one of those things. So it was, for me, it was just outside of my parents. There was not a lot of, the environment was just very uncertain all the time. I had my sister suffered with a heavy mental illness, and she sucked up a lot of my parents' time. As they, in the 80s and early 90s, people didn't know how to deal with mental illness. And, so at home, it was, there was a lot of yelling at times and chasing and slamming doors. And I'm just in the basement shooting pucks, at a wall, for, try to kind of like, keep things quiet. And then as well, I'd go upstairs and see my mom and dad crying, and I would try to like, do the best I can to, keep the peace there. And again, I tell this all for a reason that we will probably get into later, but, so, there was 2 paths there, from academically, I was in the brink of getting kicked out of high school, for just getting into fights and trouble constantly all the time. And, but like athletically, I was excelling, in, specifically in football. I played hockey all the way up, but, football was something where I really found my, like it just was, it was the only place in my life that made sense, right? Like where literally all my, like having a big head made sense for football, right? Like having, just my body type, like everything felt like it fit, right? Like, and, I always come back to just like the interesting relationships of high school football is such an interesting sport because you have literally all walks of kids, right? You have the kid that's like 110 pounds that shouldn't be on this field. And then you have the giant kid that like, was like felt uncomfortable with his size up until this point. And now he's like the man. And then you have the great athletes. And so it's just, and then you come together in this huddle, right? And it's just like this, it was the first time I felt that level of connection and just brotherhood and family. And so I had big dreams and aspirations from a football perspective, but again, school was obviously, a big standing or, a big hurdle that stood in front of me. And so, later on in my high school, I had gotten to, a pretty severe argument with the teacher. And, I got sent to the office for the umpteenth time, and they were getting to the point where, the principal had called my dad into the school and my parents, and they were going to expel me, and basically send me to a trade school. And I was, it was the first time in my life I was petrified because this school was like, the school where they wanted to send me was not a nice place, right? Like trade schools and that stuff during that time, especially where I was growing up, were not safe. There was not people there to be mechanics, right? Like it was like screwdrivers were getting used for other things. And, I just like, it was at a point where I felt just desperate. And I remember I had a teacher that, that I got introduced at the time by the name of Mr. Fryer. And he was a resource teacher at the time. And so my parents and the principal and him worked out a deal that I was no longer allowed to participate in class, but, I was going to go to Mr. Fryer's office every day and get my work and just work. And for whatever reason, you would think the kid with ADD would like, ADHD or whatever it was, would not excel in that, just being by myself in a room. I don't know, but like, it just, this teacher kind of let me just like, I would, start doing my normal tricks and trying to get kicked out of class and do stuff and bouncing off walls. And he would just be like, okay, like, I'm not kicking you out. Like at some point you're going to make yourself bored here. He's like, I'll be back in an hour. You can either get your work done or stare at a wall. And then, so I started working, and I would write, and I started to enjoy writing, and then he'd come back and he'd read my work and he would correct it for me, and he would like rewrite things for me, and he'd print it up and take my handwriting and type it into a typewriter. And it just was like, and then I started getting, my 50s were becoming 60s and my 60s were coming. And it just started this success where, and it just kind of this really cool bond developed. And I started to believe in myself, academically, and was able to get my grades up and go to university. And I'll fast forward to a story, and, got accepted to the University of Guelph, and I played football there. I played football for 5 years, and it took me 7 years to graduate, but I did graduate. At that time, again, like I had no idea what I wanted to do. Academics was still something I had to do, was not something that I chose to do. And, after I finished, I spent, I gave myself 2 years to try to find a way into the CFL. I remember I drove across, it was like out of an 80s movie. Like I drove across Canada with a set of shoulder pads and a helmet and cleats in my trunk of my car, and just go to like walk on tryouts with a set of VHS tapes, to give it hand out to coaches. And, nothing kind of came from it. And, it was kind of, you're too short, for this and too slow for this. And I was a classic tweener. So I ended up actually, getting an opportunity to go play over in Europe. And, so I played in Europe for two seasons over there. And it was just a great ending to kind of like my athletics career, or whatever you want to call it, journey. But I'll never forget, I played in Italy, and, when our last game was finished, I was sitting out, in this kind of older part of where I lived, which was Bergamo, which is a town that some people may know, because unfortunately it became famous for COVID and got decimated by COVID. And so, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful town. I recommend if anyone's ever there to visit. But, so I'm sitting there, and I said, well, what am I going to do now? Literally everything I've known, the only thing I've ever been good at is gone. I had got no girlfriend, no job, no house, no money. Like I literally had, $0 in my bank account. So I sat there and I thought about it, and he's like, well, I'm like, I want to do something that matters. I want to do something where I can make a difference, I thought back about the teacher, Mr. Fryer, that took a chance on me, and the coaches in my life were the ones that really believed in me and said, well, maybe I can go back and be a teacher and do things differently than, the teachers I had that, I constantly butted heads with. So I made a choice to start applying to teachers college, and that was an eye-opening experience because, again, school, I got through university, but school was definitely not a priority. And the rejection letters started pouring in. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, I want to change the world. Why would people not want me to be a teacher? Right. Like,
Yeah.
This is ridiculous, right? Like, what does it matter what I had in first year psychology? But I didn't have the grades, and so, then I ended up finding out that I was able to get accepted into teachers college in Duville College. I got accepted in their Masters of Education program. And it was funny because a lot of people that go to school in Buffalo for teachers college are like second career type people, right? Like it's, people that have been working for a few years after they graduate university, and now they want to go back, and you can kind of get your teacher's certificate in like a condensed, form. So a lot of people are there for like quick transactions, right? But for whatever reason, like, and I don't know if you look at, I've spent a lot of time just looking at and studying how, the adolescent brain develops, especially with males, and how long it continues. So I don't know if this played a role in just in terms of my own maturity of but like, I just fell in love with learning when I was there. Like I never missed class. I was early, and it was funny. Everyone else hated it. They just wanted to be done with it. And it was like, for me, it was like, I couldn't get enough of it. And I went from being the guy bullying people that wanted to ask questions in class all the time to being the guy that was like hand up every 5 seconds, and so it just felt right. And, I was super excited to be doing something that I felt like I was designed to do and had purpose. But while I was there, I met a young woman who was engaged to a guy whose family was starting a sports school at the time. And, and she, one day pulled me aside and says, hey, look, like, I've heard your story. Like, I think you would be you got to meet my fiance and his family. They're starting this sports academy, just outside Toronto. And I think you'd be perfect. And I was like, she described it to me that like, it's going to be a lead academic institution that's going to also provide an equal platform for athletics. And, anyways, the way they described it, I was like, well, this is amazing. Right? Like, of course I'd want to work here. So, the school was called the Hill Academy at the time, and they were just had started. They had about 12 kids. And I met and went with the principal at the time and the owner, which was the father. And, it was funny. It was like looking at myself, like the dad, Peter Merrill is probably one of my biggest mentors in my life. And it was hilarious. He played football at University of New Brunswick when they had teams, but, he's just like, hey, he's like, you like to teach, you play sports. He's like, he's like, and then he went on to some, crazy tangent story. And I was like, is this a job interview? Like, what is it? Like, like, then we just started connecting, and it was probably the coolest job interview I ever had, because we just got to know somebody actually for who they were as a person. We just started, and he's like, I don't know what I can pay you, but like, we'd love to have you here. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, I just want a job. Like, I don't even care if I get paid. Like, I just want to do something, and, so I ended up taking a job at the Hill Academy, and my first job was I was a bus driver. I'm going to try to turn these text messages I don't know how to stop this, but so I was a bus driver. I was a dorm parent, and I was a friend. Like I taught French, grade 9, 10, 11, 12, and I can't speak French, grade 9, 10, 11, 12, science. And then I assisted with the phys ed side of things. And so basically I was like, whatever. And I think I was making like $20,000 at the time. And I was like, I'd never been happier. Like, I was working like 12, 16-hour days, and, I was single and 27 years old, and just felt like it was the most, perfect job in the world. And so as I started, and up to this point, I'd never thought about being a strength coach. It never crossed my mind. Like, I didn't even know it was a job. We had a strength coach at Guelph who was unbelievable, by the name of Chris Mumford, who some of you guys know. And he was he just literally like made my life a living hell at golf all the time. Like he was a close friend, but like, the only thing I knew from like, this guy was way smarter than anybody else I knew and let everyone know it on a regular basis. And, and every time I went in the weight room, I just wanted to bench press and squat. And he would always try to make me move in these different directions. And he was very ahead of his time, for what he was doing. And I didn't understand it. I just wanted to do bicep curls. I was classic. I was the guy that everyone hated, you know what I mean? Like that we all get frustrated with now. Right. So anyways, so that was all I kind of knew from it. And I definitely didn't appreciate him at the time, but, so as I was there, so this school day was designed so these kids would play their sport in the morning. And then instead of coming for regular phys ed class, they would come to the weight room, for their phys ed. And then their phys ed program was like a hybrid, kind of high performance training program mixed in with, the traditional components of, Ontario, healthy active living program. So I kind of started like, really digging this, right? Like I was there like this, I'm like, I could do this, and so we had a guy that was there. And, I could tell he was kind of checked out and he wasn't loving it. And, I had a feeling that he was going to leave just for whatever reason. Like he just, he was always kind of on his phone in the corner and just like, and, lucky enough to me, he just left in like, in a very short and abrupt manner. And I just saw an opportunity. So I went right to the owner and I just said, like, I was like, hey, like, I can do this job. I don't need to get paid. I'll add it in. Let me do this. Let me show you I can do this, and then, at the end of the year, we can talk about what you can pay me, but like, don't give this job to anyone else. It's like, I really think I could be a strength coach, and at the time, again, I had literally, like, I graduated University of Guelph with a general Bachelor of Arts, right? Like, and I did my Master's of Science at, in Teachers College. But again, at the time, like I had no idea beyond of like what I could Google at the time, or like an old 1980s like workout program for football, so it was like 10 sets of 10 German volume training, right? Like just insane. Like I probably would have gave kids steroids if I had the opportunity, no, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't have done that. But,
don't let anybody pick up the phone while you're Googling either.
So,
the internet will cut out.
But it was like the classic, right? Like, I was highly motivated, super ambitious. I was a great motivator, but like super, super uneducated and like lacked in knowledge and experience. So like we got into it and I was like, I thought this was about like just rah speeches, pump people up and like, throw as much weight in the bar. Like I remember I used to say to kids, I'm like, if it doesn't feel like your small intestine is going to pop out your ass, you're not squatting properly, and I was like, and I sure like this is like, this is almost 18 years ago now. Right. So, you got to give me a little bit of leeway, but, and then literally, I think some kids' small intestines started, there was definitely some hernias and like blown out backs. And I'm like, wow, I'm like, these kids are like, I'm hurting people right now. Like, I got to figure this out. Like they're super excited, but like, I'm like, I got people limping out of the gym. Something's not right here, So after a few weeks, I called up Chris Mumford and I'm like, hey, Chris, like, I'm a strength coach. He's like, no, you're not. I'm like, yeah, I am. I'm a strength coach. He's like, no, you're not a strength coach. He's like, you're a wannabe. And I'm like, okay, like I'm probably definitely a wannabe. And he's like, but if you want to be a strength coach, like I'll teach you, And so Chris took me under his wing and like, and my mind was blown. Like, Chris is like, there's very few people in my life I owe as much as Chris did. And like, he took me down a path and connected me with my other mentors who are Vern Gambetta, and Gary Gray, who just kind of blew my mind and the doors off what I thought strength conditioning was, and kind of took me on that journey to where I am now. So that's kind of the Coles Notes version. Fast forward, I was at the Hill for 15 years, built it into, what I believe is one of the best, sports academies in the world and in North America. And we were regularly sending 20 to 30 kids to Division I schools a year. And in my 15 years we had 2 ACL tears and very minimal soft tissue injuries, and I just saw like it was the best thing that I could have ever done for my every day. Like for the first 10 years I was by myself training 150 kids by myself all day. And I was like, that was the best thing I ever could have done for my development as a coach. So I learned to talk, communicate, and I could experiment. I could try different things. And learned what worked, what didn't work very quickly. And it was just an incredible experience, and kind of what led me and opened up a lot of doors and to where I am now, as a part owner of Grit. So, yeah.
Yeah, man. It's an amazing sort of journey of sort of recognition in retrospect, right? And reflecting back. At the time, we don't really know, but I love those pieces of sort of, you've used some really good language that a lot of people I think can identify with in terms of, being an outlier and being a bit of a tweener, not really knowing where you fit. And then Mr. Fryer being, ironically enough, the resource teacher becomes the resource that you need, right? And then that becomes sort of your, if not your MO, at least part of your MO moving forward, is to help others and to see beyond. And this is the one, not the one, but one of the things that stood out from the first time that I talked to you on the phone to every interaction that we have on the floor at Grit, and conversations in terms of looking at things a little bit differently, looking at things way beyond trying to push people's intestines out their ass, but also looking at it beyond, the program is what's going to dictate what happens. It's the human being that's coming in and the human being that's leaving the gym, and understanding all of the pieces that go into that. So as you navigate that, the Hill Academy, obviously where you get your feet wet and get started, it's a very well-run program. You still have some ties there. You're back and forth there. But at Grit, the other side of this is you are a consultant, a trainer. You were the director of performance for the national program in China, right? The women's hockey program. And then now sort of consultancy with Hockey Canada, numerous NHL athletes, OHL, all DHLs, CFL, all of these different things. How did that come to be? I think from the outside, a lot of people look at this and see this as like, oh my gosh, you get to work with, like, you're the guy that Mitch Marner goes to in the off season. And then again, like, that brings another story around to sort of you being too short or too slow. And you look at his frame and things that he's been told along the way. To have somebody who's been told that in his corner, behind him, pushing him, helping him, that goes a long, long way as well, because you've lived it and you've felt it, and he feels it obviously through those dialogues. But from the outside looking in, a lot of people look and say, wow, like, I want to be Dan Noble. He's working with all those high-end athletes. But you're not the kind of guy that goes out and seeks out sort of praise and seeks out, let me work with the best in the world so that I get noticed. It's behind the scenes stuff. Did that sort of evolve naturally? And if you can sort of identify a couple things that you feel you do really well. I mean, you have already, like, communication stands out and sort of erasing the ego from the equation, or at least sort of graying it out. But I'll let you sort of take that wherever you want to go in terms of that piece.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other side of the journey that was interesting. So when again, when I was starting out the Hill, I was making very little money, and I had a ton of student debt. And I had to find a way I was like, I got to find a way to make some money here. And I remember my first summer as a teacher being off, and I was like, this is amazing. I went and bought PlayStation 2, and I was like, I'm locked in here. And like, I played video games for like 48 hours straight. And then I was like, and I slept for 2 days straight. And then I was like, okay, well, now what do I do? I'm bored out of my mind here. And, and I realized I was like, I am not designed to sit still. Like, I can't take time off. Like, I don't have a cottage, so I ended up starting my own kind of private training business in the summers, so for some of the athletes that were local and that I worked with. So literally started in the backyard with a few med balls and a sledgehammer and a couple tires. Again, at the time, is very basic stuff. And, a set of like 20-pound dumbbells. And like, it's funny, like the two first kids I ever trained were these two guys when they were like, I want to say they were 10 and 12 years old. And Brett Ritchie and Nick Ritchie, actually, funny enough, have both play in the NHL now. And, but like, just, their dad worked at the Hill. And so I started training these two, and we just had, we just, like, again, the two of them. And then, next day was, a third kid showed up. And then the next day, we're outside in the backyard. He's like, well, what are you guys doing? I'm like, I want to do that, and then another kid showed up. And so like, so then we got too big for this backyard. So we moved into this little garage, so we were in this garage, and it was just like, it was like this very, like, I probably made a little bit of money. Like the business side was never there at the start. Really, I was like, they're like, what? I'm like, what do you want to pay? And people like, I don't know, does this work? And I'm like, sure, like, and it was just kind of like, and for whatever, and to my fault, I've never been a business oriented, like, I've just always been very about building my product and like, and just delivering in word of mouth. And all of a sudden I went from being 3 kids and all of a sudden to, 30, 40, 50, and then I was like, well, how am I going to do this here? Like, what do I have here? Like, and it started to kind of, blow up, and we're still outside in 40-degree heat and running around and training. And it just, and I never really thought about like who I was training. Like, I just wanted people to train, and like I had 10-year-olds, I had 16-year-olds, and, and then so I started getting to this point where like, I had like a really, good group of athletes, both male and female. And, and it was just like, it was awesome. It was fun. Like I did the hill during the school year, and then I did this in the summer. And like, I had very, no overhead, cause I just trained out of a garage. And then all of a sudden, like, I didn't even think about the NHL at the time. Right. Like, I started sending a couple kids to the OHL, but then like agents started getting involved, and it got like weird, like it was like, like kids that I had trained for, 6 or 7 years, their agent would just be like, oh, well, he's going to go train with, Gary Roberts now, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, why? They're like, well, Gary Roberts trains NHL players. You train kids. And I was like, okay. And I was like, that makes sense, I think, you know what I mean? Like, and I was like, and then it just like, it kept happening, right? Like, it was like, I would develop these athletes, and then these agents would pull them out, and then they would go pay $30,000 to go train, with someone, so-and-so. And I was like, I don't understand what am I missing here? Right. Like, and then I went to, and at the time, so this was probably 8 years into it. And then it started getting frustrating, right? Then the competitive side. And I at this time I had my own facility. And I had a few kids that, again, like at that time, probably had a handful of players that have been drafted in NHL, and I never got the time to kind of complete that experience. But, at the same time, I still had a great group of athletes. But I went to an agent, and I just said like, hey, like, what's the deal here? Like, like, I know I can deliver, I know I can deliver here, right? Like, this is no short, I'm not speaking poorly of any other strength coach, but I know what I do, and I believe very strongly in what I do, and I know the athletes themselves, want to stay. I know the parents want to stay, but they feel pressure from the teams, and this whole political side, right? Like, where the OHL team would be in bed with an agency, and the agency's in bed with this guy, and there's all this money, and this whole, ugly side of the business started kind of introducing itself. And so I said to the guy, and the guy just said, I'll never forget his words. And it's funny, and I won't say his name, but, there's certain people in my life that I have, like, that have had their picture on my wall, as a motivation, and in the words of Michael Jordan, I took that personal, and, he said to me, he goes, look, he's like, stick to the kids. He's like, that's your wheelhouse. You train kids. He's like, NHL players will never train with you. And, I remember, like, my skin, like, I still get, heated now when I think about it. Right. Like, and just, so I had a picture, that I found a picture, and I cut it out, and I put it on my wall, and I wrote those words. And it's like, stick to the kids, NHL players will never train with you. Right. And, it's funny, I haven't told a story in a while, but, it just was like this, I went to just a different level of terms of and I just said, well, how can I separate myself? Like, I can't compete with Gary Roberts' facilities. I can't compete with, I didn't play in the NHL for 14 or whatever he did, like how many years he did. Like, I like to eat cheeseburgers once in a while. So, like, I can't compete with his diet, like, and it's, like, where can I set myself apart from these other strength coaches? Right. And I just said, like, it's a human aspect, right? That's where I can separate myself, is like, I've always looked at my athletes as extensions of my family. Right. Like, in that, I had the one thing was that, like, I had invested so heavily in just understanding them as people, and understanding, their struggles, and like what motivated them, what drove them. And like, and I started kind of writing those things down. I understand, like, I had 5 different athletes that all responded differently to 5 different types of communication. And I really took that to, like, like I started seeing like lights go off, and like the success of like how I was able to reach kids that were like underdogs that no one ever, believed in, and would just work their tails off. And then like to the elite performer who's been treated like a transaction since he was 10 years old, and how he just wanted to have, like a father figure in his life, or someone that can guide him, or, and so I just made a conscious decision is that, coaching to me, my dad was a minister, and he grew, obviously I grew up in the church, and I said, my dad had the church, I have the gym, and this was going to be a place for everyone. And this is going to be a place where everyone can come on a daily basis, whether they're, Mitch Marner or a house league player. And like, everybody's going to get treated the same. Everybody's going to get every ounce of energy I have every single session. And I'm like, I'm going to pour myself into everyone that comes through my doors, and again, like it just started to like just connect, and like, people started making that choice, like where, a guy by the name of Mike Del Cole was the first athlete that made a choice to stay with me, when he got drafted to the NHL. And I remember he came back, and after he got back drafted in New York, he was taken 5th overall, and he came back and he brought a jersey, and he said, and he was funny because he made a joke. He was like, he's like, hey, look, it's been a good ride, but I'm starting up with so-and-so next week. And I was like, my heart, he's like, just kidding. He's like, I'll see you on Monday, and it was just like, from that moment, it took someone again to believe in me, right? Like, just like it took, Mr. Fryer, 12, 15 years ago at that time to believe in me, it took someone else to believe in me now to open up this gateway. Right. And so, and then, slowly it was, and the same thing happened with Hockey Canada, right? I trained Laura Stacey, and it's funny enough, right? But like I trained Laura Stacey, since she was 12, and, all the way up until she made the U18 program with the national team. And it was the same thing. It's like, hey, like we got to transfer over to like more capable hands. And like, and I was like, and I realized quickly, because when this first happened to me, I got really angry, and I started chirping people, publicly, and speaking out against other coaches and their styles, and just being very adversarial. Right. And I realized like it felt good for a few seconds, but then I was the only person that came back to like haunt, you know what I mean? And so, I, after that, like it, sorry, I again lost my train of thought here. I don't know why my text messages keep coming through my computer here.
It's Sunday night, man. Everybody needs to get a hold of you on Sunday night.
I'm going to see if this works if I turn my phone off. But
no.
They
first time you got told that, there was anger and kickback.
Yeah. So it came back. Sorry, coming full circle. So I realized I was, that burning those bridges was a bad idea, right? Someone told me, it's like, you never burn a bridge because you never know when you're going to have to walk back across, right? And so I started kind of really coming back to controlling what I can control. And if athletes left, I always made sure they left on good terms, right? And if they went to train with other coaches, I'd always provide that coach with a full background of what we've done, like their history, like how I think you can better. And coaches were like, what's this? Like, why are you sending me this? And I'm like, no, I'm just trying to help with the transition, right? And what I found was, next thing you know, these athletes were coming back to me a year later, right? And so again, to come back to that human element, that relationship, and the same thing kind of happened with Hockey Canada, right? Like I fully supported them. I said, hey, it's not about me, right? It's about what you think is best for this athlete. And if you think this is best for this athlete, I'm going to help you with that, right? Like I'm going to help with that transition. And then it was really cool up until 3 years ago when Hockey Canada approached me back and invited me back in this program, and I was labeled as a Hockey Canada training facility. That was a huge moment for me, and have Laura kind of come back and work with her going into the Olympics was a pretty cool kind of closure moment. But the one thing I said is, though, even though at this point I had this group of NHLers and Olympians and others that like I was never going to forget the 10-year-olds and the 11-year-olds. And I wasn't going to change who I was. Right. I was like, I would rather have 30 loyal athletes that show up every day and work their tails off and that are dedicated for the long haul, rather than try to be this mass, like plaster Mitch Marner's face all over the place and try to have 200, 300 athletes come through at a time. So I stuck to our principles of being very small group, very customized, very tailored. And, and my goal has always been to, if an athlete comes to me at 12 years old, they stay with me through their high school career. And if they're lucky enough to play after that, then they continue to stay with me. But either way, I can help guide them through high school. I can help be a part of that experience, whether they go on and lucky enough to play sports at the next level or not. I was able to kind of be a part in their life, be a coach in their life. And that's one of the coolest things I think about my journey is this year more than ever. And I think because of what COVID's done to people, is, I've gotten so many great letters, thank you letters from athletes that were at the Hill that went on just to Canadian universities, never played sports again after that. And just these massive, just thank you letters, right? Like of just, and thanking you for just being there for them, and believing in them and like providing them with a space and never giving up on them. And it just was very reaffirming is like for me in my life, like that's what I'm here for, right? Is to help people believe in themselves. And whether that's Mitch Marner, or Anthony Sorelli, or like, the 10-year-old, hockey player that, is getting dragged in there by mom and dad that I can make smile and love to move and run and jump and leave feeling better about themselves that day.
Yeah, it's an amazing sort of melting pot in terms of who's coming in but the output, your delivery and your willingness and your approach is so refreshing in the space, because there's not a lot of people that want to put that athlete first. There's not a lot of people who want to put their ego aside and truly serve the other, the environment that they're in to get people better. And it's interesting that you touch on that, because from being in the pro space to being now out of the pro space and sort of looking at this as third party consultancy type work where you're not on the bench, you're not traveling with the team. I think there's advantages to that. And there's huge advantages to being able to see the person, because now it's not a matter of you don't have upper management, you don't have the dollars and sponsorship money coming at you to I don't think it's anybody's fault in those spaces. I think that's just a byproduct of being in those spaces too, which you and I have talked on in the past. We don't need to go into that realm right now, but it's really nice that you can have people come in the off season and find themselves again, and find what they need for training. And they're not this number, and they don't have to hit these numbers with you. You're going to find alternate means, and you can look at an exercise or a movement and say, okay, listen, like squatting is not a good thing for you based on femur length and ankle injury or shoulder issue or whatever those things are. And your adaptability is not only with exercise and movement, but in tailoring these things. So anybody who doesn't know Dan, I'd encourage you to reach out and just connect with them at some point. Is I'm going to give out your Instagram handle because that's public knowledge anyway, at Coach Noble 45 on Instagram. And just some of the stuff you've been posting through COVID in this last little while, where it's been a stay at home and you've had your kids out in nature, and just how you embody movement and what that does and what that provides for human beings, let alone sort of you as a coach, but everybody else around you. I think it's absolutely amazing and perfect. And the facility is at Grit Athletics Toronto, in case you want to look that up on Instagram as well. And that's where Dan and I have some overlap. Dan as a co-owner and the director, and I have been had the opportunity to work alongside you with some of those athletes as well. Just coming back around, you touched on Laura Stacey and that women's group with Hockey Canada. A tough go, right? Like through COVID, they're getting ready, 2 years, no tournament. They go to Halifax, they're there, and all of a sudden, bam, door slammed. That's not going to happen. No plan. And then sort of 5, 6, 7, 10 days later, whatever it was, okay, we're going to do this again. We don't know where, we don't know how. It's going to be at the end of August with the IIHF and the World Championship. That's just one incident. And that's a really big one. It's highlighted with the group that you're very close with and you work with on a regular basis. But through COVID, what have you learned from, as a general sort of synopsis, from athletes in working through this space? I mean, some of those athletes are 16, 18, and they're missing seasons in the OHL. Others are getting close to the end maybe of their Olympic potential. A general sort of synopsis in terms of things that you've learned through COVID and navigating this without competition. What's shone through? What light has shone through? Yeah.
It's a great question, because there's during COVID I had 3 groups, right? Or like the summer, if we go into the summer of this NHL season, we had our junior and OHL players, and I would probably include like the minor hockey, like higher older minor midget players, and And then we had our NHL players, and then we had women's, the women's hockey team. And it was very interesting to see like the incredible resilience from the women's group, period. Like they've faced it before. It was like, and I remember very early on, like when things started getting delayed, the guys started crumbling, right? Like in like mentally, they were, and the women were just like, we're used to this. Like this is what our path has been like, from day one. So like,
Right.
We've got this, right? And you saw that and just the incredible resilience that they would just demonstrate on a daily basis. But it was a really interesting, like, and then you have these young guys, right, that are like just dreamers, right? Like these, like, these kids that are like in the OHL or minor, and like the dream is so real to them because it hasn't been, it hasn't been polluted yet, right? It hasn't been like, they haven't faced that like harsh reality of, to them, they're at the pinnacle of their dream, right? Like I'm one step away from, the NHL, and they can feel it, or I'm one step away from the OHL. And although that dream may be that much farther apart, they're just there. And for all of us, we all kind of like, we really relied on each other. And you were a big part of this process too, right? You were there. I mean, the amount of times, like, I'll be honest, like, that I would end up in tears at points, and just like, by the end of a session, like convincing, like this group of NHL guys to work out, and when they don't need to, like, they don't even have a season start date, right? You know what I mean? And they're like, well, why am I doing this? Right? I'm money, and guys that are playing for contracts, and like, I'm feeling incredible stress. I just opened up a training center in one of the most expensive areas of Toronto in the middle of a pandemic, right? I haven't seen a paycheck in, 8 months, and so I'm carrying like this heavy angst in me and like this pit in my stomach, all, that if someone pulls the right thread, my whole life feels like it's going to unravel, at a point, so I just, again, kind of came back to, of like what centered me, and you've been a part of that, and me processing that too, was again of just like, okay, well, what can I control here? Like I know right now I have a lot of confused and hurt people, and that, like, how can I be there for them, right? Like how can I show up for them every day and bring the most energy and like positivity, and like create a space where it's like, once you step through those garage doors, COVID doesn't exist right now, outside of having our masks and safety protocols and whatnot. But like, when we're in there, like this is, we're going to choose our moods. We're going to choose our mindsets. And man, like it was like the most incredible 6 months off season. It was the best off season I've ever had, and there's just a heartbreaking end to it of like, one, it was awesome to see the NHL guys bust through. I think they, like, I tell you, like, I look at Mitch, like, and what he's doing in the NHL this year, like that guy worked so hard this offseason, and it was like, there was heated moments, right? Like, there was moments, and like, we would all get under each other's skin and push, and guys would be pissed off. And, but like to see what came from that, like in all of those guys, like right now, and this is not me boasting about me, but like, we've got a top 5 scorer in the East Coast League. We've got a top 3 scorer in the AHL, and we've got a top 5 or top 3 scorer in the NHL. You know what I mean? And like, and all those guys, it just like have come out of nowhere, and they all had something to prove, right? And they were given an opportunity. So that was really awesome to see a group of guys that have probably not faced that level of adversity in a long time, and really, I think it attributed to their mindset. It's made them appreciate their ability to play and compete on a different level. But like, forcing myself to have hard conversations with guys like that, and like hold them accountable during this time, like, those aren't easy conversations. And then, from the younger guys, it's like, it was hard, man. Like we walked right to the edge of that OHL season to like literally a month ago. Right. Like those guys trained 9 months straight every day outside of our deloads and obviously, and, but like, looking in those guys' eyes, man, it's like, it's heartbreaking, and I know this has been a heartbreaking, like, people are dying and losing their jobs, and no one cares. Like no one cares about the OHL kid who's, got one last shot to try to like maybe get drafted or maybe get an opportunity to get a tryout somewhere. Right. Like, but like, those are my people, right? You know what I mean? And like, those are the people that I'm with every day. And like,
Absolutely.
it's a really, it's a huge, like, example of like, you can do everything right in life and things still don't go right. You know what I mean? Like, just because you do all the work and you make all the sacrifices and you're a good person and you're humble and you work hard, like, it doesn't mean things are going to turn out okay. And a lot of times things don't turn out okay, and going through that process with those guys and walking them through that. But at the same time, like, one of our guys just started his own league in Erie. Like, Ethan, I didn't tell you this, but like, Ethan Burrows got together with another group of guys and they started a showcase for OHL players to give them a 12-game series in Erie, and they invited all these NHL scouts, and it's legal and it's all, and like, who knows what's going to come from that, but like, how amazing is that, right? Like what else could you ask for as a parent, as a coach, that like, you've taken it upon yourself to do something, right? Like, to find a way. Like, that's what we say to our athletes all the time. I want you to find a way. And these guys stepped up and again, so they've got that coming up in June, and and then the women piece was like, it's still raw, right? Like, they were, and there's a lot of, just, being on the front row seat of like inequality and seeing something that like, I haven't had to, experience, and just the frustration that these women face, you know what I mean? And I think there's a lot of, it's not just equality. There's business. There's like, there's just a lot of like harsh realities in that situation,
Yep.
And again, like, if people saw how hard that group of girls trained, right? Like never in my life have I seen a group of people train as hard as them and like literally leave everything out on a table and this is the crazy part about like Hockey Canada. People don't realize this, right? And it's no fault of just the reality of national level sports. I'm sure gymnastics is the same or whatever it is, canoe, kayak, like, you've got a group of 40 girls competing for like 23 spots, so all 40 of these women are competing and with no guarantee, right? Like, no guarantee of that they'll even get invited to Worlds or be centralized for the Olympics, right? Like, it is like, to be able to just know when to like just shut up and listen and just, how to help people get through that, how to program through that, how to understand how important that mental piece is in terms of your programming, what I'm going to program this day, you know what I mean? And like, and for this week in this phase and dealing with the transition back in the mental health stuff, and acknowledging it and just making sure that like, and some are fine, like some just continue to roll. And then others, it's been far worse, right? Like, is the ones that are, and it feels like this pandemic has really screwed the middle, right? The middle and below, right? Because the elites, right? Like, look at U18s, right? Like U18 for men, the best players in the world right now, they find a tournament, right? Like, Jeff Bezos, quadruples his billions of dollars that he already has, right? Like, but like the people that are like the borderline players, the tweeners, right? To your point, have felt the harshness of this more than anyone, whether it's tweener financially or like talent wise, but like those underdog stories have been far, far more like, like you've just been put, like the adversity they're facing now is just far greater. Right. And so for the players in that situation that were borderline players that needed those camps, needed those opportunities to prove themselves, it was extremely heartbreaking, but again, they show up and they work. Right. Like, and we had that conversation on Friday and I just said, hey, like at some point, and my dad used to say this to me all the time, right? He's like, okay, like the funeral's over, the grieving process is over. You don't have to like what the reality is, but you have to participate, right? Like you have to make a decision of what you're going to do moving forward. And you can be pissed off, right? Like you can be upset, you can be angry, but if that's not going to contribute to the fuel and the motivation you have to get back in there and prepare for in August, then like there's no point of doing this, right? Because if you're going to live in turmoil and have 1 foot in, 1 foot out for the next 2 months, like you're going to drive yourself crazy. Like you just got to plant the flag and say like, I'm not accepting that this was okay, but I'm also not going to allow myself to be beat by this. Right. And, and so, and that's going to take time, right? Like that's, but at the same time, like they're they're professionals, and they respond, and they understand that that's the only choice you have is to respond.
Yep.
So
yeah, I think there is so many great lessons in there, and that middle group, I think, yeah, you're right. Like COVID has done a lot. It's shone a light on a lot of things that have always been present, but the unknown for that middle group that just keeps going and keeps extending the unknown. I don't know if I'm gonna get if I can push to make it to the CFL. I don't know if there's going to be a season. I don't know if I should quit that other job to train a little bit harder so I can make this season. There's so much there that's hard to navigate and difficult to navigate. But swinging back around to that women's group, I've never been around a group of athletes ever before in my life that train that hard and at the end of the day are so grateful and say thank you for being there for them and being around, or even just picking a weight up or just prescribing an exercise or talking to them about those things. I think it's an amazing group. It's an amazing culture that that you're a part of and have allowed me to be a part of and welcome me into that piece. I think it's I truly wish that somebody had filmed every single day, and the number of complaints in that group was so minimal during training. It was that you walk through the doors, they're training, there's no complaints. They're there, they know, they've been through that before. Resiliency and adversity and failure, like these are the things that we can continually prepare for on a gym floor, in a weight room, in a strength and conditioning, in a performance space. Regardless of if there's a season, these things are going to trickle over into reality, into life outside of sport as well. And these are things that that you embody and embrace. And I think those talks go such a long way, and not just in actually talking about it or those raw speeches that you touched on at the beginning. No, this is raw speeches, like raw and to the human and to the core, and make a huge difference. And man, there's this. Yeah.
On that point, I was going to say it's interesting because I think there's one thing I wanted to touch on there was one of the big things for me was starting grit. It's like I have a daughter, and again, I've worked with female athletes, for a while now. And one of the big parts was that I wanted grit to be a platform, that prioritized, female athletic development and performance. And it was really interesting, right? It's sad. And this is not this is not a pat in the back for me, but it was doing for our NHL men's group, I book their ice, I manage their schedules. I do all those things, right? They're from a performance. Okay, guys, we're going to skate 3 times this week. Next week, we're going to skate 4 times. This is, this is what time, this is how it's going to work. And okay, you've got a golf game at this time. That's a part of my job. There's a concierge part to that where it's I make it all work. Right. So that's a part of that personalized, approach. And for me, I just did the same thing for the women with you, having you on the floor and having access to and it was just, and to hear them say that they've never had this before, right? They never have, people that were booking their, prioritizing their ice and allowing them to train alongside Mitch Marner and Anthony Sorelli and that they weren't, oh, you can come in at the end of the day or your add-ons or again, that you had. And this is a big part of me, because I know the NCAA women's stuff, right? With the whole weight room issue and people were, posting about, the inequality that clearly exists in the Final Four. And there's something that I really think that people need to understand if you want to be an advocate and be a part of the solution is that you need to start what does this world look like in 10 years when we start providing literally the same opportunities, right? Without does it cost me as a businessman at times, to do certain things? But yeah, for sure. But it also cost me time to do things for the men's group as well. Right. Do you know what I mean? And so to make that decision of this is for, we're going to prioritize this because the goal here is to create the best possible training environment. That's the priority for all of our athletes, whether, female or male or otherwise, right? It's creating that environment. But that requires sacrifice, especially from the female, for coaches to say that we're going to carve out time and facilities and our ice sessions of making sure that that we have access to the proper, some of the best skills coaches in the world, right? I know OHL players that would never skate with some of the guys that, some of these players have skated with. And so it's like, well, how do we expect the sport to grow, the game of women's hockey to grow, if we're not giving them the same resources and the same tool and the same coaches that you would get, right? And like, when we just give them a piece of paper and like follow this workout, right? And so I think that's just a big part. I want to be clear, and I've probably got to be careful I don't, get fired for, saying some of these things, right? But like, I just think it's like, I know one, like, I want to think how I want to say this, but like, I just think there's a credible opportunity in society and in history right now to like, to just change things, right? And to start to like, into like, again, to just be prioritizing things, and not, instead of just constantly saying, well, the money's not there, right? It's never going to change, right? Well, the money's never going to be there until you start seeing the same amount of little girls on the ice skating at 10 years old as you do when you walk in an arena, and say the same amount of little boys, skating. And that, like, a girl doesn't feel like she has to, when there's one girl on the team and she's got to go and have her own locker room to change in by herself, and doesn't have that same experience. And at some point, people are trying to push her off the team because they know she's taking the other little boy's spot that's, playing on the team below her. And like, just all those things, like, I just find like, it's like, to me, is that like, they are such an incredible group of people that can be such a shining light, for so many other, not just little girls, but little boys as well, of just seeing of like, what it takes to be successful, but like, of what is possible when they're given the same opportunities, what can come from that, and I think it's a really cool, and incredible. And again, there's lots of people doing some pretty amazing stuff for female athletes, across the country right now. And again, like the Gina, Kingsbury, who is, I believe she's the general manager for Hockey Canada, or but like, she's amazing. Like, she's incredible. Like, she's just like, you sit down and you talk with her, and her vision for the program is just like, you love it, and you love it. And you just, I don't know, that's something that I just hope more people can get on board with, and like, find a way to like, continue. And then obviously there are a small group of women, and they're small, but like, start to prioritize, the 12-year-old girls, right? Like the 13-year-old girls, making sure again that like, you're creating that safe training environment where they can come and feel valued in the same level of commitment is going into their programs, and both on and off ice. Because again, I know as the father of a 10-year-old daughter, if my daughter gets cut from this program, there's nowhere for her to play or train, and when my son gets cut, he can play at 10 different teams within, a 3-block radius. Right. And so if you don't think that equality is an issue there, you just need to spend some time and open your eyes and actually see what's there. So again, I am not an expert advocate. Like, I am just a guy bumbling his way through this, trying to like contribute to some sort of, change and solutions. But
yeah, and I think it's on the ground, and that's where it starts as well. And it's sort of that old adage of showing up to an internship or a job interview, having all the qualifications, but then they say, yeah, you know what, you just don't have the experience. It's like, this is the experience. Like, I need the experience. Like, this is why I'm here applying for this job. Yeah, man, I think we could probably do this another couple hours here. We can circle back and do it again, definitely in the future. This has been phenomenal. So many points, so many great takeaways from this, Dan. Session 72 with Dan Noble here this evening. We'll go again next Sunday with Anthony Liu, who is now a paraplegic athlete. He had a life-altering injury, crushed his legs, and is now championing for accessibility. He's trying to get to the Paralympics, and just recently got carded as a cyclist in that realm, and an amazing guy that we'll check in with next week. But yeah, Dan, listen, there's a quote, and you come to mind with this all the time in terms of this. Yeah, plant the flag. Some comments coming in, some thank yous. The great failing is to see yourself as more than you are, and to value yourself at less than your true worth. I think there's so much here and so much that you've provided, the worth that you provide, not only to athletes, but to myself in friendship and walking through this and by your side on the gym floor. I am forever grateful for this. This has been an amazing talk. I hope to get it in everybody's hands. If you're here live, thank you again. Share this with your friends and colleagues. And remember, if you're in this performance space, there is always a way to connect. There is always a way to get better and relate and resonate with others. And that's through talks like this, communicating and making yourself available. So Dan, I'll let you say good night and wrap this thing up. But as always, a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. And I apologize if we didn't get into kind of the more science-based and physiology and
no problem.
I think, you and I always get caught in these types of paths, but I just think, the thing is, I know there's some of the names that are on here right now, and it's just, I think we are on the front lines of going to be helping people out of this situation. And just, I know for me that the things that have pulled me out of this, the darker moments of my days have been trying to put other people at the center of my attention, and just trying to be a part of something bigger than myself. And I know, James, you and I have been that to each other, and we're still not out of this yet, and there's still more bad days to come. But, as the key is that, is keep pulling ourselves off and pushing that rock, but also being very real and being very honest. And I appreciate the conversations that you and I have had, and, the hugs and the COVID hugs and everything else that's come through that. And so I'm excited to see what comes out on the other end. But, as you say, this is living, this is life, right? We have no other choice. What's the other option? To stay inside, or get outside and live and embrace the struggle. So, thank you for being a part of these last 8 months and being a rock for me. So appreciate you guys listening to my ramblings.
Yeah, man, much appreciated. And we'll have you on again. We'll do some science stuff, but this is exactly, I think, what everybody needs and everybody wants. It's connecting. It's very real. Again, I love that piece at the beginning. You're not trying to be that rah coach, but be that raw coach. Show yourself, show your emotion, be connected, be available, make yourself available, and it will be reciprocated on the other side. Session 72, Dan Noble. You can get him at Coach Noble 45, the number 45 on Instagram. Please feel free. Follow up, as always, brought to you by First Star Therapy, Mobility Tape, Benchmark Athletics, and Epic. I wish you good night. We'll see you next week. Thank you. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. Check us out online. firststartherapy.com. That's FIRSTAR therapy.com. Or email us with feedback. consult@firststartherapy.com. CONSULT@firststartherapy.com. On Instagram @firststar.therapy, and our podcast host @letschat.at. This is First Star Let's Chat, an athletic therapy podcast.